Sweetie, if you can't pronounce it, that's not like my problem. That's your problem. That's sweet. I don't know.
Welcome back to the Science of Sun Safety with dermatology physician Dr. Danny Mansour. This headline says, your sunscreen is toxic. How to find one that's safe for you. So are there sunscreens that are toxic? What is the science on that? And how do we pick sunscreens based on that?
Mm-hmm. I love this question because, prior to medical school and, being a doctor, my undergrad was in chemistry. And it was my favorite thing when people talked about how something is a chemical and chemicals are bad. And if you can't pronounce this word, then is it really good for you? Like, sweetie, if you can't pronounce it, that's not like my problem. That's your problem. That's sweet. I don't know.
Like I can read it. I can pronounce it.
I can read it just fine. Like, I don't know what to tell you. But it comes down to the notion of, chemicals. This word chemical it can be such a scary word. There's a lot of fear mongering around that word. Everything is a chemical. Water is a chemical. Like, if you looked at what was in a tomato, it's like hundreds of different chemicals. We ran into a little bit of trouble just because you hear the terminology thrown around of chemical versus physical sunscreens. Make no mistake, all sunscreens are chemical. Like they use a chemical. So, what would be technically more correct is to, again, going back into like my chemistry nerd manner, is to classify sunscreens as either organic or inorganic sunscreens. So, organic sunscreens are the ones that you might hear are called chemical sunscreens. So these are sunscreens that contain filters that the way they operate is through some form of a chemical reaction that takes light and dissipates it in some form as heat to kind of mitigate the risks of the UV radiation. Inorganic sunscreens. So inorganic, if you remember back to your high school periodic table of elements, so inorganic compounds are typically metals. So these are sunscreens that contain things like titanium dioxide, zinc oxide, ferrous oxide. So these metals act as, in layman's term, more like a quote unquote physical barrier. So they help to kind of in some way scatter and reflect the UV rays that might be coming into contact in your skin. So really it comes down to in part to their chemical structure and their mechanism of action. But make no doubt that, anything that your foundation, your mascara, all of that is a chemical. So I think there's this rise in clean beauty, which I think sometimes can be a misunderstood concept. And it's always, I think, if you have questions, just ask your dermatologist. Ask someone who you trust whether or not what is quote unquote safe for you versus others. This is quite a big question because just outside of the types of sunscreen formulations, there have been publications that have come out, I think, in the last year or two. One very famous one that got a lot of media attention was a publication in the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, and JAMA Dermatology, which showed that certain sunscreens, they were detected in incredibly minute amounts in blood. And so there became this huge, commotion that was brought up about whether or not, is that safe? And the answer is right now, there are studies that are happening to investigate that. But overall, the dermatology community at large, Canada, United States at large, we know and we have so much ample data to show that sunscreen is safe. And then it's important to realize that many of these studies that make claims like these, although, not false, you have to understand how the studies were done. So oftentimes they were using sunscreen in the most extreme of ways, like if you were to apply it head to toe, your entire body, the right amount of sunscreen you're supposed to be applying, which is an outrageous amount. And most people, 99% of people probably are under applying their sunscreen.
Right.
We see that if that was not the case, then we probably wouldn't see as much skin cancer, if people were really using it the right way. But we know that everyone underapplies their sunscreen. So when you take those things into consideration, in terms of how much sunscreen was actually applied on a patient's body daily, it's significantly less than anything you would ever have in terms of your day-to-day exposure. So it's always all relative. It's always important, rather than just trusting our own ability to find the information ourselves. Like, we're here, we're happy to talk about these things with you, and in a non-judgmental, like, open space. Ask us, we're happy to answer those questions. You mentioned about environmentally sustainable types of sunscreens as well. That comes also from the fact that certain organic sunscreen filters, when studied, have been shown to bleach coral reefs. And again, at the same time, if you really look at those studies, the concentrations that were used, very, like, significantly high. And does that mean inorganic sunscreens don't do the same thing? Not necessarily. They can be just as harmful depending on the concentrations. So it's all relative. There's a lot of information out there, and a lot of the information can sometimes be confusing, even for me. Like, I have to constantly read up about this and make sure I know what I'm saying specifically. So let's take a step back. What is a safe sunscreen to use? I would say all sunscreens are going to be safe in the manners that we are currently using them. Especially because most people underapply their sunscreen. So if anything, apply more, because you're probably not applying enough. Number two, if you do have certain concerns about organic or quote unquote chemical sunscreens, then inorganic sunscreens are fine. Like, you can use the ones with inorganic filters. The reason some people don't like those is because they tend to have more of the white cast, like the lifeguard white nose that we all remember and we've seen. So everything is always a balance. So depends on what your threshold is. We get a lot of patients who are of childbearing potential, or who are pregnant or about to go towards family planning, and generally the recommendation is to, at least for now, you can stray towards more the inorganic filters, just as we have more data. Likely all of them are fine, regardless of it's inorganic or organic. But in general, that's what we tend to recommend currently, just as we get more and more data in the future. But overall, sunscreen provides so much more benefits than risks.
Thank you so much for that. And also, I wanted to thank you for telling us the difference between physical and chemical sunscreens, because I saw that term and I was like, what does that even mean? Aren't all sunscreens technically chemicals?
Yeah. Like, if we're really going to get down and dirty, like, we now know. But I like, lots of people like to use it just as a kind of a like catch-all term to describe kind of how the sunscreen works in some capacity. It's there's a little truth to it, but it'd be more appropriate to use your, like, science terms, like science terms.
I have a chemistry background as well, so I definitely like the organic, inorganic route.
Totally, exactly. I'm here for it. I stay.
Me too. All right. So then we have another headline: sunscreens. Here's how much you need to pay for good protection. So do sunscreens have to be expensive to be good?
For me, the most important thing for what sunscreen you use, aside from the baseline things, minimum 30 SPF, broad spectrum AB, UVA, UVB, potentially water resistant. Outside of that, it doesn't matter. So I don't care if it is like $1,000 sunscreen that promises to have, like, the secret to youth. If you hate how it feels on your skin and you're never going to use it, what is the point, right? So no, I don't think you have to break the bank when it comes to sunscreen. Like, it really depends on finding one that you like, and maybe that means buying a more expensive one if you've truly exhausted all other products and you can't seem to find someone that really works for your skin. You might be having to, dish out a little bit more on sunscreen, but absolutely should it not be kind of a rate limiting step for you. Many of the over-the-counter products you will find at drugstores, like, are great, are fantastic. You know, we all use them, all different types of them, and everyone has their own favorite. So as long as you're willing to use it, as long as you like how it feels, as long as you're using the right amount, the price really shouldn't be a factor that determines what you're buying.
Okay, that's good.
Spend your money on other things, you know, like
Yeah.
like money can do other things. Maybe get a little tox, you know, if here and there.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, I'm here for that.
Totally. Exactly.
We actually found 2 headlines about saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So one says the 9 best sunscreens for men,
Okay.
and the other 10 sunscreens every man should own.
Oh, cool.
So sunscreens for men, shouldn't they just be for everyone?
Yes, like really, like I don't really understand. I would love to know what this list of the 9 best sunscreens for men. Like I can already imagine with like number 1 on the list, it's gonna be like a black bottle that says like man.
Right.
Like, you know, like I mean, you do have to cater sometimes to certain populations in some
You gotta
capacity.
get them using more sunscreen.
Yeah,
So,
you know,
yeah.
if it's gonna get people to use it more, sure, whatever. But like when it comes down to it, like a sunscreen is a sunscreen. You know, it's not gonna work different on your skin versus someone else's skin outside of, you know, your skin type. I mentioned to you one consideration. So for men with facial hair, you know, you probably will not have much luck with inorganic sunscreens, like the ones that leave you with a kind of a white cast.
Yeah.
So I tend to favor organic sunscreens for that purpose because they're a lot more cosmetically elegant. They blend into my beard easily, into the rest of my skin. So, you know, outside of that, and I've tried, you know, some that are inorganic that claim that, you know, they're blend and they're zero, like invisible XYZ. Not true. If it's gonna make you use it, sure. Like try the only male version of whatever sunscreen. Like knock yourself out. Like I don't mind. You might have to pay more for it just because of marketing purposes. But really, like whether or not it is more targeted for men, you know, unless it's specifically related to a beard or some male specific issue, I would love to know more. You can really use anything.
Do what you gotta do.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks for tuning in, and thank you so much, Dr. Danny Mansour, for chatting with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments what you'd like to see us tackle next. Until next time, don't believe everything you read on the internet.